Scammers, con artists, fraudsters, they're some of the toughest criminals to catch. And today on Deviant Off Script, former FBI agent Jerri Williams is going to tell us how she spent a long career catching them. Most of those types of criminals think that they're smarter than the people who are trying to catch them. Many found out the hard way that they're not smarter than Jerri. We had a great conversation about her time in the FBI and all the amazing things she's doing post-retirement. So let's get to it. It's our talk with the amazing Jerri Williams. This is Deviant Off Script. Jerri Williams, thank you so much for joining us today on Deviant Off Script. I'm so excited to talk to you. I've been wanting to talk to you for a while. Man, I don't know where to start with you. And I say that in a really good way because you have had such a interesting and varied career both within the FBI and outside of it. How would you describe yourself to someone at a cocktail party saying, "Hi, I'm Jerri Williams. Here's what you need to know about me"?
I think right now I would call myself not only a storyteller, but a story sharer. I love to gather information and put it out there, which is what I did as a career and what I'm doing now as a podcaster and an author.
And that's succinctly put. And when I learned about you, and I'm reading your bio and I'm diving into all the stuff that you've done, a couple things jump out to me. Like you've had two major phases in your career, and maybe that's the best way to kind of handle this conversation. Is like maybe let's break it down into those two phases. Not to be presumptuous and encapsulate your life like that, but to me, my mind it is. Yeah, we have the FBI, your time at the FBI, and your time after the FBI, both of which are like equally fascinating. You've done some amazing things. So maybe let's take it at one, right? Let's start with the FBI.
Okay.
How did you make it into the FBI? How did you find that calling? Let's start there.
It was really strange. I know a lot of agents, you'll hear them say that they always wanted to be FBI agents. Well, I never thought about it. I never saw an FBI agent that looked like me. I'm talking about when I joined the FBI, it was 1982. And so, I'd never thought about the FBI, but I was a juvenile probation officer, really what they called an aftercare counselor, where I traveled all over the state of Virginia, visiting the kids that had been already adjudicated and sent out to placement centers and reform schools and juvenile, detention centers. And so that's what I did. And it was a quasi law enforcement type position. Also, my roommate from college, who is my best friend today, still my best friend today, when she graduated from college, she joined the Baltimore Police Department. So, I was already in that field. I was a psychology major. And so when I saw this newsletter that said that the FBI was looking for women and minorities, I thought to myself, that's interesting. And I made that call, and the agent who answered really recruited me.
So then you get recruited, you go to Quantico, I assume. Yep. And what was that experience like for you? Like as you mentioned, like not many people looked like you in the FBI at that time. So what was Quantico like? How did people react?
Yeah, there were some issues. I will tell you that my ending report when I graduated said that I needed to learn how to follow the chain of command. So that will tell you right there that I did have some issues, pushing back when I saw things that I thought were unfair or, disparate treatment. And you got to remember, even more so than being a minority, it was also the fact that I was a woman. It may have been 10 years since women had started coming into the FBI, but there was probably like 5% or 7% women at the time. So there still wasn't a lot of us because remember, we're sprinkled out all over. At the time, there were 57 field offices. So we were sprinkled out, around all of those different offices. So in most offices, there were just a handful of women. So people were still getting used to us. And so, there were times, where assignments were given at Quantico where I thought to myself, well, why are all the men who were police officers and in the military being chosen for this scenario? when we're supposed to be learning. If anything, I need to be part of this because I've never done it before. And so things
Yeah.
like that, me raising my hand and asking those, to me, logical questions, kind of got me in a little bit of trouble sometimes.
Not to jump forward a few decades, but I'm going to jump forward a few decades. There's a new show out on Max that you worked on called Duster.
Yes.
And the premise of that is it's the first black female FBI agent gets shipped off. She graduates. This may sound familiar to people who just listened to the last 2 minutes. Graduates the FBI Academy, seems to immediately piss off her supervisors and gets shipped off to Arizona to work on a case that she really wants to work on.
Right.
Now, hearing you speak right now, I didn't realize this may be a little bit more autobiographical than.
It is. And that's why, well, of course, I love the show anyway, but I love to watch the episodes and see things that I know, JJ and LaToya got from my talking with them, because I was talking with them before they started writing the scripts, because they wanted to learn about that experience. And, I was just thrilled, that they found me, in order to talk about it. But yeah, a lot of what's in there, were things that I was able to share with them and reveal.
In the show, the experience of LaToya, well, I mean, that's not her character in the show, but Tina. She arrives at this Arizona field office. I believe it's Albuquerque. No, that's New Mexico. Pardon me, Phoenix.
Yes.
Phoenix field office. As soon as she walks into the office, all the male veteran agents look at her askance, right? And she's immediately marginalized, and she's immediately put off to the side. Was that your sort of experience after after you graduated Conoco? What was your first assignment, and what is that experience like?
Okay, so my first assignment would have been to the Norfolk, Virginia office, where I was the first Black female agent in Norfolk, Virginia. It was a transitional assignment. Everybody went back to where they were recruited. And I had been recruited through that office for 6 months. And then my next office was Sacramento, California, where again, I was the first Black female in that field office. And I would say that it was accepting in a sense, but when it came to like a major surveillance in the evening, I ended up in a car alone, when everybody else was buddied up with their friends. And so then you wonder, okay, as a brand new agent who should be training for this surveillance opportunity, why am I in a car alone in an area that I have no idea where I am? And remember, this is before, Google Maps and all of that. So if I want to figure out where I am, I got to stop the car and pull out the paper map. So yeah, there are many, many things like that where I can show you that it was not blatant, necessarily open, but I know that there was, as they call it, bias.
Obviously, you're aware that you're a Black woman in the FBI, but were you aware of sort of the significance, the newness that you were bringing to the Bureau, and that was going to be challenging?
I didn't know it until I got in, because I was an Air Force brat, and my father traveled, and during my whole, until I got, almost graduated from high school, we traveled all over the world. We spent time in France and Germany and England and Morocco, and even in the States, we were in places like Maine, Massachusetts, Washington State. So I was used to being one of the only, Black students, and I was used to that, and I thought I had adapted pretty well. But yeah, there were times when, like I like to say, implicit bias punched me in the face. Yeah, but I dealt with it because I wanted to be an agent, and I looked around and I said, well, if he can do it and she could do it, then I can do it. Even though I will say, during my first 4 years, there were times when I actively was thinking of quitting, even to the point of, applying for other jobs. But I stuck it out, and I got to make this point very clear. I am so glad that I did. I mean, it became a wonderful job. As the saying goes, a job like no other. And it was just a wonderful career. And I'm so glad that I stuck it out and got through those early days where people understood, that I was not going anywhere and could see that I had something to contribute. And yeah, it was a great career. And I'm so glad that I didn't quit, that.
Yeah, and let's talk about the evolution of that career. So I think your bread and butter at the Bureau for a long time was economic crimes
Yes.
and fraud and con people. How did you get into that lane?
Well, I'm a body.
Okay.
I'm a body. And so when I first got to, in Norfolk, it was just 6 months. I did the regular bank robbery. New agents were a lot of times assigned to bank robbery cases because they were quick and easy and could be resolved usually in, a fair amount of time. And of course, the old applicant work where you were in charge of doing background investigation. When I got to Sacramento, I was assigned to work government fraud cases. And I could tell you, I didn't like it because your victim was the government. Somebody tried to cheat them out of, military helmets or, some type of widget that they were selling. And, it was a fraud and you had to work that. And I didn't find that
It's not what you got into the business to do,
I didn't
right?
find that very interesting at all.
Yeah.
And when I got to Philly, because I was only in Sacramento for a year and a half, again, everybody was moving like that for some reason. I guess they came up with a bucket of money to transfer people around. But once I got to Philadelphia, I was put again on a government fraud squad. And then I was so lucky to get on the economic crime squad, which is different because your victims are real people. Whether they're an elderly couple that's been, or many, because we don't do single cases like that, but a whole group, fraud where a number of elderly people were defrauded, or maybe a case, advance fee case, where a businessman was defrauded of hundreds of thousands of dollars, a business-to-business telemarketing, embezzlement from a bank or a large corporation. Those are the type of cases that I did where I'm talking to actual victims and people. And I don't know, it was just something about it that was fascinating to me, still fascinating to me. I'm just amazed at what people will tell themselves to make it okay to steal other people's money.
Obviously, that is something, as you noted, is still very today, probably even easier for criminals to partake
with the
in
internet,
today.
absolutely. The anonymousness of the internet.
Earlier in this series that we do off script, we spoke with someone who was a well-known con person. And that was the question that we asked, what do you tell yourself to be able to do this? And his response was, you just don't think about it at the time, right? Like the score is the job and, you can't think about the victims, right? And you do it so often, like the victims don't even become people anymore. And I'm sure that you ran into a lot of that with the people that you chased.
Oh yeah, and the really fun part of it is that those personalities, those type of people, always think that they're the smartest person in the room.
Yeah.
And so when I walk in, they're like, "Oh, I got this," So they'll try to be charming and or either be charming or be condescending. Either way, I don't matter. So they're just playing a game with me, and it was always fun. At the end, I never lost a case. I, always was able to get the evidence to prove that these people did what they did. And, at the end I won. So who is the smartest person in the room?
Who's the smartest person in the room? Yeah. That seems to be the downfall of most criminals, or a major downfall of many criminals, is that they think they're smarter than all these resources arrayed against them, right? Pride cometh before the fall. And that seems to be the undoing. And when you walk into a room with one of these folks, and I assume you did interrogations of suspects, right? Were you in the room doing interrogations?
We call them proffers. They're not as intense as it appears on TV, but yeah.
Yeah, well, usually, I'm guessing by the time you get them in a room, you have a lot on them, right? Because I assume it takes more to catch a fraudster than it does to a more violent criminal, right?
Yeah.
These are folks who live in the shadows. You really have to do your digging, and to do your digging, you need to really find strong evidence. Like, how did you find these people? Like, did you feel the burden of proof was a little higher
Oh,
for you?
absolutely. I think that fraud and corruption cases are some of the most complex investigations there are because most of the
Mm,
time, when you're talking about a violent crime, you know the crime has occurred. You're just trying to prove that that person did it. When it comes to
mm,
fraud and corruption, you've got to prove that what happened was a crime first. And sometimes then you had to convince your victims that they're victims of a crime
yeah.
before you can even get to the next step of proving that this person was the person who committed the crime. Say there was we know because we've had many, many complaints about a particular con person. So we know that we've looked behind the scenes and now we're able to prove that this loan broker who's supposed to be setting up loans for all of these businesses, who has accepted all of these advance payments in order to do the business, we first have to figure out that that person had no means whatsoever, had no contacts with loan people that had money or financiers, that they didn't do any made any effort whatsoever. We had to show that first, prove that first. Then we've got to go and convince the people who are now waiting for their loan to come through because they're desperate. They need capital for their business that the money's never coming. And then we need to get their testimony and their evidence and their documents to prove that this fraudster defrauded them. So it's so many steps to this type of investigation that you don't get when it's a murder or some type of violent crime or a drug deal or, organized crime transaction. So yeah, they're
Mm,
very complicated. And there are some agents who would have rather put a needle in their eye than had to go
yeah.
through this type of tedious investigation. But for some reason, I loved it, still love it.
Yeah. I'm guessing that may also go the needle in the eye thing for judges. You had to explain you had to explain things to get warrants, because I'm guessing that's, well, I don't know. Do judges deal with enough of those?
Yeah, I think they do. And usually
Yeah.
when you have anybody in that system, in the judicial system, they're assigned different types of cases. They get
Yeah.
good at that. And so when you're writing up your affidavit and explaining what happened in this particular case, everybody knows the elements that they need to address in their affidavit, and the judge is waiting for that.
Mm,
She knows exactly what she wants you to be able to articulate to her in order to get your search warrant or your arrest warrant. So now that's not writing
yeah.
it down and communicating it is not the hard part. It's just gathering
Yeah.
that type of
It's
information.
finding it in the
Yes,
first place. Yeah.
exactly.
Obviously, you've worked so many of these cases. Is there one that sticks with you?
Yeah, I used to talk about this charity Ponzi scheme that I investigated a lot, but then I realized that I have an even cooler case that I kind of put to the side, and it was
Mm,
it was an extortion, a credit extortion case. And the reason I say that I, kind of put it to the side was because I wasn't supposed to be working it. I was working a business to business telemarketing fraud where the telemarketer is not contacting individuals. He's contacting like the procurement officer of a large corporation and trying to get them to either accept overbilling or accept a bill for invoice or for product that's never shipped by paying them a bribe. And so that's what I was doing. I was working 16 cases at the same time in this group 2 undercover operation. And when I got to one of the companies, the telemarketing companies, when we arrested them and brought them in for a proffer, I found out that they were being extorted by a check cashing agency. Because when they would get the money, this is a while ago when people paid by checks.
yeah.
But when they would get money from their different businesses, to turn over the money real quick, they went to a check cashing agency in in North Philly, and some of the checks bounced and they got behind, and the check cashing the owner of the check cashing agency, sent one of his goons, to their office, and actually he took out a gun and shot right behind their heads into the wall, just to make sure they understood he was serious. And so I'm
Yeah.
investigating them for the telemarketing fraud, and they let me know that they're being extorted, and that there was actually a gun involved. And so it just happened that all of these individuals involved in the check cashing agencies, last names ended in a vowel. So I automatically assumed, I apologize for that they
No,
were
no.
members of the LCN, or the Philly has a big mob scene. And so I went to the organized crime squad, and they were not made members, but they were associates, but they were too busy. They were involved in a major investigation, and so they wouldn't accept the case. So I had to work it. I did have a training agent who I had been his training agent, who had moved to the organized crime squad. And so at some point, when the case looked like it had a lot of promise, he came and started working with me on it. But it was so much fun. There were so many consensual calls, and I would wire them up into meetings. At one time, they were sent to a bathroom in a restaurant called Benny the Bums. How's that?
Yeah.
And
You know what you're getting.
yeah, and we're strip searched in the bathroom. And another meeting, there were two brothers, and one of the brothers did have a transmitter on. I'm sitting out in the parking lot listening to what's going on, and they bring out a detector, a wand to detect whether or not they're wired, and it goes off, as they said, like a Christmas tree. It starts
Yeah.
lighting up like a Christmas tree. So it was so much fun. And we haven't mentioned this, the fact that I have a podcast, but I was actually able to get those two brothers who were my
Oh,
subject victims to come on the podcast to talk to me about this check cashing extortion case. So that was a lot of fun to reminisce about that.
wow. Man. So did they go to jail, I assume?
Yes, they did.
Prison?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They ended up, it was a fraud case, and they did end up
Yeah.
in a prison camp, a federal prison camp. And I got to be friendly with them. Obviously
Yeah.
so, they came on the show many, many years later, but they would actually call me from the prison camp to let me know what they were doing. One worked in the kitchen, one was in the painting team and was painting around the facility. So, yeah.
I'm guessing like the fact that you caught them probably like that made them respect you a bit, right? Like, you proved to be stronger and smarter than they were.
And I'm a nice person too. And I
Yeah.
think for both of them, when they got out, they got into other businesses. One got into the car sales business. I mean, I don't know if he owned it, but he was definitely high up, at least, managing, a car dealership. And the other brother was working in the financial field with handling major credit card business. And so they both were very successful at the end, and kind of thanked me, in a way, for stopping them from this, fraudulent telemarketing business that they had been in initially. So, yeah.
That's fun, and for you, that must have been a interesting change of pace. Like all of a sudden, you're working an organized crime case, and that must have been an interesting seasoning to your usual meal.
Yeah, it was. And, initially I thought, I got to give this away. And then once, nobody was able to take it and I started working it, it was like,
Yeah.
yeah, I can do this.
It's so
I can do this.
you worked economic crimes for a long time, and then eventually you become the spokesperson for the FBI in Philly. And then you became an advocate for the FBI, and I'm guessing this was the last assignment of your FBI career, yeah?
Yes, yeah, it was at the very end. Most people who do those type of jobs, those collateral duties, tend to do them towards the end of their career. So it was like the last 4.5 years of my FBI career. I had been doing it part-time as, again, a collateral duty. when the full-time media person, spokesperson was, on vacation. But yeah, I was asked by the special agent in charge to do it full-time. And I thought, because I'm strategic that way. I knew that that I wanted to write books, that I wanted to become an author. And I thought, this is a great job that would help me
Yeah.
transition into that entertainment media, industry. And so, yeah, I said yes.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask. Like, because obviously you see the retirement from the bureau coming down the road, and you have to start thinking about what comes after.
Yes.
And you're making that shift, and so yeah, like let's talk about that shift. And you retire from the bureau, and hopefully you have a very nice pension and some freedom to do things. But you're there for 20,
It's changed
20.
since then.
Yeah,
Yeah, but I
Much
I
has.
got the good stuff.
Yeah, much has changed since then. But you're making this transition into this new phase of your life. You start writing books. Like, what was sort of your journey into that?
All right. So, as an Air Force brat, which we mentioned, I never lived anywhere more than 3 years. My whole family read books. Books were my friends. I had two sisters, they read books too. And as a avid book reader, I always knew that I wanted to write a book. And here I am, as an FBI agent. Wow, all the stories that I could possibly tell. So I actually started writing my first book before I left the FBI. And it is inspired by a real case in Philadelphia where you had a public official who was supposed to be in charge of enforcing the laws in the entertainment industry, and he was breaking all the laws in the strip club industry, all the laws that he could possibly break. And there were two very attractive female agent friends of mine who were working that case, and I knew, wow, this is a story. So I had started working that before I left the FBI.
You published your first novel, right?
Well, not too fast.
Not too fast. Okay,
Yes.
back it up.
Yeah. You skipped that. So while I'm writing it, because it took me 8 years to write this novel,
Wow.
Yes.
And I say wow because I badly want to write a book. I badly want to write a novel, and I can't get past the short story phase. And everyone's like, just write a couple pages a day, and in a year you'll have a novel. And I'm like, no, I won't.
I will say this. I probably wrote the novel in 3 years, but it was bad. It was
Okay.
bad. And my first reader was a friend of mine, a reporter from the Philadelphia Inquirer, who read it and said, this reads like a 302. And for those who don't know, 302s are the FBI's investigative reports.
Yeah.
So that is not a compliment. And what
No.
he did is he introduced me to his editor for projects at the Inquirer, at the newspaper. And she
yeah.
became my developmental editor. And I worked with her over a 2-year period, writing a chapter or rewriting a chapter and turning it into her, meeting with her, either in person or on the phone, and kind of just talking about, the chapter, my sentence structures, the length, the words I was using, and she taught me how to write. So that's part of that 8-year process. But
Okay.
during
That's
that
a good process. It's almost like
it's an
going to
excellent
school.
process. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so just refining and polishing that book. But during this time period now, I have retired from the FBI, and I've got this great post-FBI job, which is being Director of Media Relations for SEPTA. And for those who are from the Philadelphia area, SEPTA is the Southeastern Public Transportation Authority. It's
Yes.
the transit. It's the buses, the trolleys, the subways, and the trains that go out throughout Philadelphia region. I was their director of media relations, and that was a 24/7 job. I could be called
I bet.
all the time in the middle of the night because somebody tried to committed suicide by train. There was an assault on one of the buses, or maybe one of the buses happened to run over somebody in the street. So
Things happen.
things happen. And so I loved that job. It was very, very close to what I did in the FBI, mission oriented. and public serving. I love SEPTA. I know they're going through some hard times now with, their budget, but I love working there. And so during this time of working this very high stress job, I was also finishing up and polishing this book. And when once I got my first agent and was ready to, hopefully sell it to a traditional publisher, that's when I left, because I had my FBI pension. I had now gotten my SEPTA pension. And so I was ready to become
You're living right pension-wise, yeah.
Yes. So I was ready to become this best-selling crime novelist. And so I left and started concentrating on writing books and fell into the podcasting game.
Yeah, and they can be tied together. And like the podcasting game, and I'd love to, let's talk about your podcast in just a second, but I kind of want to get into that through sort of some of your nonfiction work, right? Okay. And you wrote a book called FBI Myths. I can never say the word myths. I'm like the Muppet Show. Myth. FBI Myths and Misconceptions, a manual for armchair detectives. And I think a lot of people who listen to your podcast and my podcast and consume true crime, would find a lot of this fascinating. The title says a lot. I think the title does a lot of the heavy lifting for what it is. What made you want to write that book?
Because, and we were going to wait to talk about the podcasting, but that's an important part of why I wrote that book. Yeah. Because when I was doing interviews with different agents, we were constantly saying, yeah, it's not like on TV or not like in the movie. We were constantly saying that. And I came up with 20 cliches and misconceptions about the FBI that you find in books, TV, and movies. And I was just kind of talking about that and to different people. And I had this entertainment attorney who said to me, why don't you turn that into a book? Never thought about it, because I was thinking I'm writing crime fiction. And then I was like, oh, okay, that's a good idea. And it ends up being my best-selling, book, because people want to know what they get wrong, especially if they're script writers, screenwriters and authors. It's nice, they want to get it right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to give away any of the book, but what is your favorite myth or misconception of all the lists that you made?
Oh, I'm telling you, it will constantly be. It's number 2, but more and more it's continuing to be number 1. And that is that the FBI doesn't play well with others. I was just watching this movie called Straw. It's Tyler Perry, and I was really enjoying the movie. And then all of a sudden the FBI shows up and they take over, and they're mean and they're nasty and they're condescending to the police officers. And I'm like, oh no, not this damn cliche again, because it is totally the opposite. In most cities, they know each other. The FBI, has task force members, especially in a bank robbery squad. This was a scene where a bank robbery. We have task force officers. We have officers from that police department who work in our office. We pay them their overtime, and so the FBI can't just show up and not already know everybody, and everybody have already been working together. It's just so irritating me. And then they have people have books or TV shows where the FBI is coming in and taking over a murder investigation. They're very, very, very strict situations where the FBI is involved in a murder. In most cases, if you see the FBI, it's because they've been invited by that local department or the State Department to come in to bring in their extra manpower and their extra resources to help. So you can get me talking about this, so I'll just stop, because I will go on and on about this.
Of all the time I've spent in crime and journalism and reporting on it, that is definitely my takeaway too, right? The FBI not playing well with others is not something that I have come across. Usually it's the exact opposite that I've seen. It's the local agencies that don't play well with the FBI, usually because of turf reasons. And yeah, you're right. Usually the FBI is there because they have been invited. And once you invite the FBI in, you should expect certain things. You should expect some expertise. You should expect some, you're inviting them in because you can't handle it, right? You're not inviting them in because you can handle it. I think that it rubs a lot of local law enforcement or state law enforcement the wrong way. And I think that is where you see the tension. So my personal experience in journalism is a lot of that narrative comes from the other side of that.
Or when you see it in entertainment media, it's because the person who wrote that particular script or story got all of their information about the FBI from another book or another TV show or movie.
It perpetuates itself. And I think there's also this, it's easy to make that narrative because the FBI, is the federal police force, right? And like in a way, just broadly speaking, it's representative of that. And you can, for those who want to paint the government as, which is great for novels and movies, like this corrupt, super competent, evil force, like, that, or bureaucratic malaise, whatever you want to use it to symbolize. The Bureau can stand in for a lot of those things that you want to symbolize that are bad about the federal government in your story. It's an easy thing to do. It's an easy narrative to hook into. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm guessing in your novels that you did not go that route as far as portraying the Bureau.
No, I did not. I try to be authentic, because I know better.
Yeah. Let's talk about your podcast, FBI Retired Case File Review. Celebrating almost 10 years.
Yes. Almost.
And how many episodes
years.
about?
I posted 358 episodes last week. And so I post 3 times a month. I try to take the first week of each month off, not because, now I can relax, but because I also have a newsletter that I put out, and I want to use that week to write the newsletter.
And I want everyone to check out your podcast. I want everyone to check out your newsletter. Let's talk about the podcast. Again, the title says it all, FBI Retired Case File Review. Let's talk about it. Like, what will people experience when they listen to your show?
Yeah, so what I do is I interview retired agents, mostly agents, but I also have interviewed other FBI professional non-agent employees, all retired, all former, and I interview them about a case or a program. So I'm not doing interviews about their career. For me, shows like yours are the best place for that. For me, I want to get deep into a case. And so we will talk about a case from predication, when the agent was first assigned that case, and take it all the way to sentencing when, hopefully, somebody goes to prison. And because I'm talking to the case agent, the person who worked this case, I can really get behind the scenes, and they can tell me not only what they did in their effort to investigate the case, but what was happening to them personally. I just did this interview that I'll post in a few weeks, where an agent was saying how his wife said to him, "You're never home. You don't spend any time with the kids." And so he said, "Okay." And he took his son to go get pizza. And when they got to the pizza place, the pizza arrived. He gets a phone call. He says to his son, I gotta go. I just got an assignment. He takes him home. He drives 3 hours to DC, and then he gets on a plane to Djibouti, where he now investigates, as a member of the hostage rescue team, the 2 couples that were murdered by Somali pirates, and does that whole investigation and gets home 2 months later.
Wow.
Okay. Wow. Do you think the wife was happy?
Good Lord.
Yes.
And this is exactly why I think people should listen to your show, is because here's a little inside baseball on true crime podcasting, folks. Like, booking FBI agents, active or retired, or getting them to talk about their cases is very difficult. Most FBI agents are either not allowed to talk because they're active, or if they're retired, there's something of an omerta, right, among FBI agents, and so
we're very cynical people. We're always wondering what do you want? What's
sure. And there are a lot of bad actors in this realm too, and just as you said, like a lot of narrative out there is that the FBI are bad actors. There are a lot of people in this space who are out to get you, right? And so you having access to those stories and those cases is pretty rare in the true crime world, right?
Yeah.
We've been very lucky in that we've been able to talk to a few federal officers. I think at this point we've sort of proven ourselves that we are good actors, but you get them all the time because you are a trusted person and you are able to get good stories out of people and you're able to get them to open up. And I am telling anybody listening or watching, when it comes to federal law enforcement, when it comes to the FBI, that is uncommon. So that is why you should listen, folks.
Well, and this is a little bit of a bragging, a humble brag, but I also got a seal of approval that I can, when I reach out to agents and they're not sure, I can just remind them that I received the FBI Agents Association Distinguished Service Award for telling
G-Man
FBI
honors.
stories. Yes.
Yeah.
I got the award behind me.
There it is.
Yeah. And so, I got to go to headquarters and sit next to then FBI Director Christopher Wray and accept the award. And so anybody, that I might talk to and reach out to, who's a retired agent, and they're like, oh, who are you? I just have to kind of throw the award up. Matter of fact, I put it in my signature for all emails.
Yeah.
FBIAA award winner.
Yeah. I mean, it's, again, for people who have ever tried to book an FBI agent, having that kind of credential goes a long way,
I have to tell you something that just happened to me, and I don't know how it's going to end, but I think you as a podcaster will find this very interesting. Just what you're saying about how difficult it can be to book an FBI agent. I had a listener contact me on Friday to let me know that they were listening to another podcast and that they kept feeling that I've heard this before. And they went back to my podcast and found out that this podcaster had stolen my episodes, erased my voice, and put their voice in.
What?
Yes. So I just found out about it. It's a network. So unfortunately, I was away all week, and now that I'm back, I'm working this episode for tomorrow, and I had, of course, my the wonderful opportunity to speak with you. So I haven't been able to do anything about it, but that podcast is coming down.
Warpath.
Yes,
that's what I'd be on.
Can you imagine? Yeah. And they have some of my biggest guests on there. Like legendary undercover agent Jack Garcia, one of my closest friends who's been on the episode many, many times, that has, lots of downloads on it, Judy Tyler. And it's like, how can you do this as a fellow podcaster?
Yeah. I mean, I can't, I would be on the warpath. If you're in the podcast world, this is a big no-no. And, you may not be familiar with,
it's plagiarism. And
it's
copyright
plagiarism.
infringement.
Straight up, the interviews that we do, they're not public domain. They're not, they're not to be used. I will say a lot of people out there don't understand media law, but still, I know. I'm trying to give the most possible generous reading to something that has no generous reading.
This is like I said, it's a network.
I would go nuts. I would go nuts personally. Yeah.
I did go nuts, but because I haven't had the opportunity, because I've been working, I was away all weekend, so I'm rushing to get this episode out for tomorrow. But by the time tomorrow, once I know that it's done and it's ready, I'll be contacting, Apple Podcasts and Spotify to get this podcast taken down, because
you're listening to this, perpetrator, Jerry's coming for you.
I'm coming for you. You know who you are, and so do I.
I'm keeping an eye on the time. I'm being mindful of your time, so there's so much stuff that there's places, things and podcasts and books that people can experience the Jerri Williams world.
I like that. Oh, I usually say the Jerri Williams empire. So
the Jerri Williams empire, the Jerri Williams cinematic universe.
I like that too.
Let's actually, before we tell people where to find your stuff, you work with J.J. Abrams. How did you get into sort of that world of working in films and television? Is that a new thing for you, or have you been doing that for a while?
No, it's relatively new. I would say maybe it started in 2018, 2019. Those shows, I don't know whatever happened to them, but the first show that I worked with closely with the executive producer and the writing staff was Class of '09 on Hulu. It was very, very good. I really enjoyed that show. And around the same time, get this, how would you feel about looking at your email inbox and there's the subject line of an email that just comes in saying, request for consultation on J.J. Abrams' show. And I thought,
Yeah, I'd feel great about that.
I'm like,
Well,
oh,
no,
okay.
the first thing would be like, which one of my friends is punking me?
Yes,
Right?
exactly. That's exactly how I felt. But I knew it was real because it said that they wanted to set up a meeting, but I needed to sign a non-disclosure agreement first. And
Yeah.
then I realized, oh, this is real.
Yeah.
This is real. So I signed that non-disclosure agreement. And like I said, we were talking about the show Duster before they had even started writing it. So yeah, I'm in Zoom meetings. This is in 2020 with J.J. Abrams and Latoya Morgan talking about the show and kind of helping them develop what the concept and the premise is by first just kind of telling my story and then them asking me direct questions about, what could this happen or what would that be like and just things like that. And I so appreciate the fact that they wanted it to be authentic and to get that FBI Black female character right. And I love
And like
her.
we mentioned earlier in the show, I think everyone should check Duster out on Max. You've listened this far in the podcast, you're going to see a lot of what you heard.
Yeah.
I think in that show that you're reflecting Jerri's life, and it's absolutely fascinating. Jerri, books, podcasts. Where do you want people to go? What do you want people to do?
I want them to go to jerriwilliams.com, and that's Jerri, and everything's there on the first page, on the home page. You can look at my books, you can look at the podcast. I also do a monthly blog. Sometimes I do it more than once a month, where I take a particular movie or TV show and I review it, not for whether it's good or bad, but for teachable moments about the FBI. Like that movie that I just mentioned to you, the Tyler Perry movie, Straw, that's on Netflix. That will be the next one that I review. And to get the record
Tyler Perry, Jerri's coming for you, too.
Yeah, to get the record straight about how the FBI would actually handle arriving at a bank robbery hostage situation and how that would be handled. But I've done at least 75 of them. Some of them are in the book, but I've done many, many since then. And so the books, the podcast, and the blog post are all there at jerriwilliams.com. I'm on social media too.
And if that just went in one ear and out the other, that web address, it is in the description of this show on YouTube and anywhere you listen to your podcasts. Last question, Jerri. It's the question I ask everyone. It's my last question.
Uh-oh.
What did I not ask that I should have asked?
I will say that I have a new literary agent. I haven't written or published a book since 2018, but I just turned in a new crime novel with a new special agent character to my agent 2 weeks ago. So,
congratulations.
fingers crossed that new book will be coming out sometime next year. And the publishing industry, it takes a while. So next year or, early 2027. So.
Awesome. Congratulations. And
Thank you.
I think I mentioned earlier, I am incredibly envious of your ability to finish a book.
Just do it.
I know. You write 2 or 3 pages at a time.
Yes.
Eventually you'll have a book.
Yes, that's true. Let's do it.
Jerri, thank you so much for being on Deviant. Thank you so much for your time. I loved our conversation.
Thank you, Dan.